lot, so we're probably not going to stand, but I'm just going to do my best. I have a couple of thoughts, and I have just a couple of things in my life that these couple passages have really helped me and cemented some things for me in my walk, and I just want to share them with you. It's not going to be anything like Dad's preaching style, and I'll be hopefully having some crowd interaction and all that, so just I appreciate you guys listening. We're going to be starting in Daniel, just 1 verse 1, and I'm just going to kind of be reading and explaining as I go. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, into Jerusalem and besieged it. So Nebuchadnezzar has sieged Jerusalem. And if you're familiar with this story, you know how this goes. Okay, but I'm going to keep reading. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. This is part of the judgment of Jehoiakim because he has disobeyed God. And we're going to skip down to verse 3. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children who were no blemish, well-favored, skillful in all wisdom, cutting in all knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them, stand in the king's palace, whom they might teach the learnings and the tongues of the Chaldeans. The best of the best, the honor roll kids, the top athletes, how to put it in today's terminology. King appointed them daily provision of the king's meat and the wine which he drank, down to verse 6. And this is some of our main focus right here. The children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And down to verse 8. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat. I've been taught this before, and this has just stuck with me. Daniel, when he was around 13, 14, decided this. He decided he would not defile himself the king's meat. And when he was young, he did that. This is a commitment he made. The commitments you can make now, this is my first point, commitments you make now can and will make a difference in your future. And we'll go into Daniel's future in a minute, but it shows up again and again and again. Daniel then made a decision, and it affected him what historians believe to be 60 to 70 years later. He's an older man, the main purpose of this sermon. And a little bit of a side note here, during this captivity of Jerusalem, okay, this is where they steal all of the temple stuff, all of the temple trinkets and instruments, and they take them back to Babylon. Okay, just keep that in mind. So Daniel, number one, has already purposed in his heart at a young age to not defile himself. And he surrounded himself with people who would support him and help him do that, by the way. It wasn't just himself. He surrounded himself with godly Christian people. That's you are who you hang around. I mean, I just came out of high school, and even though some people are not around the people they hung around, they still act like them. And they aren't doing good things. They aren't making good decisions. They aren't acting the right way. And we have people that I work with, and etc. That all, you can just tell they have been defined by who they hang around, the commitments they've made. Skip over to chapter 2. In the second year of verse 1, in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. He's having such bad dreams and visions, he has nowhere to go. I'm just going to kind of paraphrase what happens in this chapter, but basically Nebuchadnezzar's like, man, I need every wise guy, I need every soothsayer, everything. I need you guys to explain this. This is troubling me beyond end. Okay? And they were like, he explained it to them. They tried their best. They did not know what was going on. And I mean, he was so mad, in fact, that he was going to kill them. Daniel found out. He's like, let me hear it. Let me pray about it. And with God's help, again, Daniel purposed in his heart. He didn't defile himself, and God blessed him with that. And he was able to answer Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Now, again, this is just something that I think the adults in here really can understand, is that the friends you make and the commitments you make and everything is because of how he was, one, raised, and two, decisions he made to do these things. I've already said that. But you already see one way it affected him. He got into a place of authority after this. He gained power and respect more than anything. And with that power and respect came money. I mean, he literally became, at the end, a very wise and fabled man in Babylon, and he lived in the palace. He did these things He followed God's will for his life, and here we are. Now, not everybody's going to be rich when they follow God's will for their life. That's not saying that. But Daniel shows that he was able to speak right to the king, knew exactly what God wanted him to say, and he benefited from it. Now we're going to go over chapter 5, and this is where the meat of my message is. I'm very familiar with this chapter. I've probably read it 50 to 100 times. This is just, it's so important, and this is some of, not all of it, but this same passage I've preached to the people in chapel. I think I've talked to some of you guys about that before. This is where I preach from, Daniel 5. So I'm going to be reading this. You just follow along. Chapter 5, verse 1. Belshazzar the king made a great feast. This is Nebuchadnezzar's son. Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, while he tasted the wine, Daniel 9. I don't know why I started reading that. Nope, it's chapter 5. Okay. Good night. I'm thinking of a different book. Chapter 5, verse 2. Belshazzar, whilst he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple, which was in Jerusalem. Like I just said a couple minutes ago, this is direct disobedience. And Nebuchadnezzar most likely told Belshazzar, and I believe he did, hey, they're in a sacred place. Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 4 literally talks about he's worshiping the one true God. He dies. Something was mistranslated because his son does not believe the God that Nebuchadnezzar died believing in. And he says, you know what? I think my dad talked about those, bring them out. I mean, he's probably a little drunk by now. He's drinking the wine, he's having a good time, he's partying. And it's not just a wine and cheese party. Babylon was a very bad place. There was lots of immorality and sin going on right now. And they drink out of it. Verse 3. Then they brought out the golden vessels were taken out of the temple of the house of God, which was at Jerusalem. And the king and his princes and his wives and his concubines, like I was saying, and drank in them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver and of brass and of iron and of wood and of stone. Question, does anybody see a God that's missing in there? Anybody? I'm asking like legit. Anybody see it? What God is missing? God of Israel. That's to him it would have been the God of Israel. He's praising every other God except the one that they stole it from. And God immediately responds. In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand, wrote over against the candlestick upon of the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, and the king saw the hand that wrote. The king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, and his joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote against one another. He was shaking so badly his knees were hitting. The king cried aloud again, just like his father did in chapter 2. Hey, go get those astrologers, Chaldeans, the soothsayers. The king spake and said to the wise men of Babylon, whosoever shall read this writing, show me the interpretation thereof, shall be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold around his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. It is a mirror of what happened in chapter 2. Not a dream. He physically sees a handwriting on the wall, and he does the exact same thing his dad does. He has not learned anything that his dad taught him about the God of Israel. It's very important to listen. When you hear Dad's actual sermons, and you hear in Bible study, and you hear all these things, if you don't apply them, it doesn't mean anything. If you don't follow your commitment, it doesn't mean anything. Daniel did, and we're going to see how that affected it. Verse 9, the wise men couldn't interpret it. Verse 9, then the king Belshazzar was greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed in him, and the lords were astonished. And then, verse 10, this is an important verse you might just skip over. Now the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet house. The queen spake and said, O king, live forever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed, blah, blah, blah. She's kissing him up, right? Verse 11, there is a man in thy kingdom, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And in the days of thy father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him, whom the king Nebuchadnezzar, thy father, the king, I say, thy father made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. She remembered Daniel. She remembered the God, but she was still at the party. She was still doing stuff. Daniel was nowhere to be found at this party, by the way. If you're a Christian, you're not around that kind of stuff. If you claim to be a follower of that, you're not doing those things. And Daniel King lived it. He didn't just say he did that and then went to it. He actually did it. She knew about God. She literally remembered Nebuchadnezzar talking about him, but she was still here. Okay? For as much excellent spirit. Daniel was brought in. This is verse 13. Then Daniel was brought in before the king, and the king spake and said to Daniel, Art thou the Daniel, which art of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of Jerusalem? I have heard of thee, that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that thou light. And he just, okay, keeps going. And then we're down to, let's see here. Sorry. Go all the way to verse 25. Okay? And this is the writing that was on the wall. Mene, mene, tekel upharsin. Daniel is talking to him. He's explaining everything that's happened. He's like, okay, now here we go. I just told you off. Here's the interpretation. This interpretation. Mene, God has numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances and are found wanting. Perez, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. If you know anything about history, Babylon was the most powerful, empire at that time. Not even close. It was insane. It was so powerful that the libraries of Alexandria, which I believe are burned, don't quote me on that, I believe that are burned during this pillaging that's about to take place in Babylon, that Nebuchadnezzar and all of them built. It is considered one of the greatest wonders of the world, 7 greatest wonders of the world. I mean, they were a big deal. They were huge. And Daniel just said, so, okay, I just told you off. I'll go back a couple verses and explain what he said. And your days are numbered. People that are hundreds of miles away, thousands of miles away, going to take it over, and that's it. And Belshazzar's like, you know what? Give him a chain. Now look, if a guy just told me my kingdom's about to get destroyed, I don't give him the gold. But at least Belshazzar was a man of his word. It's like, he gives him the king. Imagine Daniel just told this guy he's about to die, and he starts giving him jewelry and making him third in the kingdom. I don't even know how I'd react. It'd be like, Mom, I'm about to wreck your car, and you give me $10,000. Mr. Blair, it'd be like you. If I went up to you and said, I'm about to rob your car dealership, and you gave me your house. It's a complete, it doesn't make any sense to me when I read that. But he was just, okay, thank you. Okay, that makes sense. My days are numbered. Here's your third in the kingdom. And Daniel was like, man, you're about to die. I don't need this. This kingdom's about to be gone. We're going to go back a couple verses, okay? We're going to go back to verse 21. So all this has happened, but there's an important detail here I want to share with you guys. And he was driven from the sons of men. He's explaining, you know that your grandfather was turned into a beast. You know that he sinned. You know all of these things. This is where verse 21 is. Driven from the son of men, his heart was made like the beast, and his dwelling was with the wild asses. They fed him with the grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointeth over it whomsoever he will. And thou, his son, O Belshazzar, has not humbled thine heart, though thou knewest all of this. And now, that is, without a doubt, the most challenging verse I read in the Bible. That verse right there, verse 22, I have highlighted in every Bible I've owned, in my Bible app, all of it. It challenged me to my core, because I apply it to my own life. I'm surrounded by preaching. I live in a good Christian home. I went to a private Christian school. I probably have heard a lot of the Bible. Not all of it. Very little of it comparatively to how much we just can't understand it, because God's so powerful and magnificent. But I've heard a lot of sermons. I've heard a lot of teaching. And sometimes when I sin, this verse just pops in my head. I knew all these things, and yet I did them anyway. Belshazzar was told, but he didn't listen. That's just so convicting to me. I don't even know how else to present that. He was told one thing, he didn't know there. Daniel calls him out, and because you did it, and then we read it. Your days are numbered, your king's about to be destroyed, the Medes and Persians are coming over. And guess what? Verse 30. So look at this. I think the Bible's kind of humorous this way. 28, he says the proclamation, the final one, the Medes and the Persians. Verse 29, commanded Belshazzar, they clothed Daniel. They should third rule in their kingdom. And literally the next verse, And that night was Belshazzar, king of Chaldean, slain. 3 verses, he goes from Medes and Persians are going to kill you. The next verse, boom, Daniel's third in the kingdom. He did what he asked him to do. Verse 30, he's dead. Belshazzar is dead. I mean, it was that quick. I mean, God had, I can only imagine that God had given him second chances, third chances. God is a merciful God. He gave him chances. He knew that he was taught these things. He knew that he wasn't ignorant. What about us? What about me? That's what hurts me so much. That's what convicts me so much. How many times have I known these things but not done it right? Not followed it? How many times have you? That's for you to decide and you to answer. And that was my main point. Daniel can only talk with the king with authority now in his life, and then with Nebuchadnezzar, because he had surrounded himself with God daily and with the right people. And Daniel could only have the authority to call out Belshazzar for knowing what to do and not doing it, without also doing what he knew he was supposed to do. He couldn't have been a hypocrite. God would not have used him if he was a hypocrite. God can't use any of us if we're hypocrites. We have to make sure that we're right in our own lives before we can go tell somebody else about their sin. That's the more you think about this verse, the more you apply it to every context of life, the more you realize, man, this is us. This is America. This is the world. This is the Southern Church. This is the Christian church. I mean, just be honest. Raise your hand if you know a hypocrite. If you've ever met a hypocrite before. Ever. I mean, any time in your life. Ever met a hypocrite. We've all met one. I'm probably the reason Allison raised her hand. Okay? I'm probably the hypocrite. I understand that. Okay? Daniel wasn't a hypocrite. As Christians, we don't need to be hypocrites. And that's not just about Christian things either. If you say, I'm going to go sweep, boss, before I leave, and you don't, you're a hypocrite. You've lied. If Mr. Keith, sorry to pick on you, but if you were like, hey, I'm about to mix this audio board, and I'll do it in 2 hours, and they never see you again, they're not going to think good things about you. You didn't do it. They said they're going to pay you. You said you'd do it. You shook hands on it, and then you never did it. And then in that conversation, you mentioned how you went to Hardin Valley Church. They're never going to think anything good about Hardin Valley Church again, because they met somebody who was a hypocrite, did not do what they said they were going to do. So that's just. I don't have this. I'm not gonna do an invitation or anything crazy, but that's where my heart is. I've been very what's the word? I'm getting recorded here, so I don't want to say something bad, but just downright annoyed with people that I know that claim to be a Christian and are more hurting the cause of Christ than ever helping it by getting saved. And that sounds really mean to say out loud, but it's true. They would be better off just being quiet and not saying they were a Christian than telling people they were a Christian and then living their life how they are. And we all just thought of somebody when I said that, because it affects all of us. So when we come back Sunday, I would encourage you, number one, to, before you pray for anybody who you think is doing that, pray for yourself. It's a daily prayer of mine, and I have to constantly remind myself that, number one, you don't do everything perfectly, and number two, you do things after you know you shouldn't have done them. And that just humbles me all the way down to the ground, because I can't be mad at somebody else when I'm doing things wrong as well. Now, if I'm doing things right and then someone does it wrong and they're lying to me, that's different. Don't be exploited. You get my point. And then once your heart is right towards that, what I pray is, God, help me help them see and not be mean to them, not be overbearing to them. Show them in a Christian way how to approach them well. And you'd be surprised. Some people just, it's not even like sinful rebelliousness. Sometimes it's just ignorance. And it's like half and half from what I've experienced. So I appreciate you guys listening.